The glass did not shatter so much, as it simply stopped existing in one piece. One moment it was whole, sitting at the edge of the Hargrove dining table, where it had sat at every annual winter dinner for 11 years. And the next it was on the floor in 3 clean pieces, and the sound of it breaking was the only sound in a room that held 47 people. No one moved to pick it up. Taraji's Osei had been the one to knock it over, though not on purpose. She had been pulling her chair back. Pulling it back because Clifton's mother had just told her in a voice meant to carry that perhaps Taraji would be more comfortable sitting at the end of the table with the younger cousins. She was 41 years old. She had been married to Clifton Hargrove for 9 years. She had attended this dinner 11 times, including the 2 before they were married, when she had come as his girlfriend, and everyone had been careful. The way people are careful when they are not yet sure how long something will last. They had stopped being careful around year 3. The glass was still on the floor when Clifton's mother, Evelyn Hargrove, turned back to the conversation she had been having with her sister-in-law and resumed it without pause, as though the sound of breaking glass was simply weather. Something that happened, something you waited out, something that did not require acknowledgement. Taraji sat back down in her original chair. She did not move to the end of the table. She did not say anything. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at the centerpiece, white poinsettias this year, in a low silver bowl, and waited for the dinner to begin. That was how it had always gone. The first time Taraji Osei had walked into a Hargrove family event, she had been wearing a camel coat that had cost more than her first car. She was 30 years old and had recently closed a Series B funding round for the software company she had built from a spare bedroom in her apartment in Mississauga, and she had driven up to the Hargrove property in Muskoka in a rented SUV because her own car was modest and she had not wanted to make an impression with it in either direction. She had made an impression anyway. She always did. It was not something she could turn off. Clifton's cousin, a man named Bertrand, who wore linen shirts in all weather and had never, as far as anyone could tell, held a job for longer than 14 months, had looked at her when she walked in and said, loudly, "I thought you said she was in tech," as though tech and the woman standing in front of him could not exist in the same sentence. Clifton had laughed. He had a way of laughing at things that were not funny, a short, expulsive sound that was meant to signal that he had heard something but was choosing not to engage with it. Taraji had learned to identify this laugh within the first 6 months of knowing him. She had believed, for much of those 6 months, that it was a form of diplomacy. She understood later that it was closer to fear. Evelyn Hargrove had shaken Taraji's hand at that first dinner with the firm grip of a woman who had been raised to be impeccable at surfaces, and had said, "Clifton has told us so much about you." She had not specified what. Taraji had smiled and said it was lovely to be there, and she had meant it. She was good at meaning things. It was one of the qualities that had made her company successful. People trusted her because she did not perform sincerity. She simply had it, the way some people have good posture, naturally and without effort, and so it reads as something else, something more intimidating than they intended. The Hargroves had found her intimidating. She understood this around year 2, and she had spent a considerable amount of energy after that trying to be less so, which was its own kind of exhausting. The deliberate softening of yourself for the comfort of people who had not earned that softness and would not have recognized it as a gift, even if they had. The comments about her hair had started in year 3. She kept it natural, had for most of her adult life, and at the Hargrove dinners it sat in a careful updo that her stylist in Toronto spent 40 minutes on. At the summer gathering of year 3, Clifton's aunt, a woman named Hortense, who wore a great deal of coral and considered herself progressive, had tilted her head and said, "You know, I think you'd look so polished with it straightened. Have you ever tried that?" Taraji had said she had when she was younger, and Hortense had pressed. "And I stopped," Taraji had said pleasantly, and had turned to ask Clifton's father about his golf game, which was the conversational equivalent of pulling an emergency brake, because Gerald Hargrove could discuss his golf game for 45 uninterrupted minutes without requiring input from anyone. The hair comments became a recurring feature. They were never cruel enough to confront directly. They existed in that careful middle territory of things that can always be explained away as concern or curiosity, or even, God help everyone involved, a compliment. Taraji cataloged them the way you catalog small structural damage in a house you love. Noting it, monitoring it, hoping it wouldn't spread. It spread. Year 4 brought what Taraji would later refer to, privately, as the photography incident. The Hargroves had hired a photographer for their family portrait, a young woman with an elaborate camera who spent an hour arranging and rearranging 43 people on the grounds of the Muskoka property. In the first arrangement, Taraji had been positioned at the outer edge. In the second, when the photographer had asked people to step closer together, and the group had naturally compressed, Taraji had found herself standing just outside the frame. Literally outside it. She had not moved. The group had moved without her, the way water moves around a stone, and the stone does not move. The photographer had not noticed, or had noticed and said nothing, or had asked and been told something. Taraji never knew which. The official Hargrove family portrait of that year did not include her. Clifton had apologized in the car on the way back. He said it was an oversight. He said the photographer should have caught it. He said a lot of things that were true about whose fault it was, and none of them were about what it had felt like to stand outside the frame while your husband's family smiled for posterity. She had accepted the apology. She was good at that too. The thing about Taraji Ose that the Hargroves did not know, and had not asked about, and had not tried to find out, was that in the 9 years she had been married to Clifton, her company had grown from a Series B startup into one of the most significant data infrastructure firms in the country. OZTech had, in the year before the winter dinner that would change everything, been named to the Financial Post's top 10 most influential companies in Canada. Taraji had rung the opening bell at the TSX. She had been profiled in 3 national publications. She had given a keynote at a conference attended by 17,000 people in Vancouver. None of this had happened quietly. It had happened the way significant things happen, loudly, visibly, in the places where people who pay attention to such things were paying attention. The Hargroves did not pay attention to such things. Or they paid attention and chose not to acknowledge it, which is a different kind of not knowing, more deliberate and more costly. Clifton knew. Clifton had always known. He was proud of her, in the way some men are proud of a thing they do not fully understand, with a genuine warmth that is nonetheless slightly removed, as though the accomplishment exists on a shelf slightly above where he can comfortably reach. He spoke about her work in general terms at dinner parties with his own friends. He said things like, Taraji runs a tech company, in the way you might say someone does something with computers, and she had stopped correcting the framing around year 5 because the correction always felt like showing off, and she was tired of calibrating how much of herself was acceptable in a given room. She had learned the Hargrove rooms early. The acceptable amount of herself in those rooms was approximately 60%. The dinner the winter of year 9 was the same as the dinners before it, in the ways that mattered. The poinsettias were white instead of red. Bertrand had brought a new girlfriend, a woman named, she actually said this, Bunny, who was 26 and had very shiny hair and who asked Taraji, at the beginning of cocktail hour, if she was the one who did Evelyn's alterations. Taraji had said no. She had said this pleasantly, in the way she said most things at these dinners, with the pleasantness of a woman who has decided that grace is a discipline and is committed to practicing it regardless of provocation. Oh, Bunny had said, I just thought, because of the... She had gestured vaguely and then trailed off. I'm Clifton's wife, Taraji had said. Right. Of course. Bunny had looked around, as though hoping someone would arrive to change the subject. And then Bertrand had in fact arrived. And Bunny had turned to him with the relief of a person who has just been handed a life preserver. Taraji had carried her drink to the window and looked out at the lake. It was frozen, which it always was by December. and there was a dusting of snow across the ice that made it look like something on a card. She had bought this view, in a way, had poured 9 years of presence and tolerance and 60% versions of herself into the right to stand at this window as part of this family. She thought about that sometimes. What the cost of belonging had been. Whether the math still worked. It was while she was standing at the window that Clifton's brother Reed had come to stand beside her. Reed was 3 years younger than Clifton and had the easy confidence of someone who had never had to construct confidence from scratch. It had simply come with the package, the way the property in Muskoka had come with the package, and the school connections, and the name that opened doors before you could knock. "You look like you're calculating something," Reed said. "I'm always calculating something," Taraji said. He had laughed, and she had not been sure whether he thought she was joking. The dinner had started at 7. By 7:40, it had settled into its familiar patterns. The conversations about the cottage, the fishing, Gerald's back, the real estate market in various desirable neighborhoods, the cousin who had gotten engaged, and the other cousin who had ungotten engaged, and the subtle arithmetic of family approval that got applied to both. Taraji participated where she could. She asked questions. She listened. She complimented the food, which was genuinely good, because Evelyn had hired a caterer who knew what she was doing. She was reaching for the bread basket when she knocked over the glass. After the glass broke, and after it became clear that no one was going to acknowledge it, a kind of stillness settled over Taraji that she recognized. It was the stillness she sometimes got in meetings when she could see that a negotiation shifted. When the other party had made a move that revealed something they had not meant to reveal, and she was assessing what that information was worth and how to use it. What the glass revealed was simply, she was still invisible. 9 years in, married, present, never absent from these dinners, and she was still the kind of person whose knocked over glass could be ignored. Not cleaned up, not fussed over, ignored, like weather. She set down her napkin. She picked up the 3 pieces of glass herself, carefully, and placed them on the edge of the table where a server could collect them. No one helped, no one commented. She sat back down. Clifton, at the other end of the table, the seating arrangement had evolved over the years into something where they were rarely adjacent, caught her eye briefly, and made a small gesture that she had learned to translate as, "I see this. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do." She had spent a long time being moved by that gesture. She was less moved by it now. The conversation continued. The servers brought the main course. Reed made a toast to the family that was generous and well-worded, and that included, toward the end, a reference to new additions who've become part of the fabric. She knew this was meant to include her, and she gave him a small nod that she hoped conveyed something between acknowledgement and the specific complex feeling of being named as fabric. Bunny, 3 seats down, leaned toward Bertrand and whispered something. Bertrand glanced at Taraji and looked away. Gerald asked about her company, briefly, the way he asked every year. A single question, answered, acknowledged, with a and then the conversation moved on. This was the full extent of the Hargrove family's curiosity about what she did, annually. She had stopped bringing it up herself around year 4. It had felt like announcing herself in a room where she had not been invited to speak. The dinner was winding down. Coffee had arrived, and Evelyn's sister had brought out a dessert she'd made herself, a trifle in a glass bowl, and everyone was admiring it. When the television in the adjacent sitting room turned on, no one had turned it on deliberately. One of the younger children, a 7-year-old belonging to a Hargrove cousin, had been playing with the remote while the adults weren't watching. The screen had flickered to life on a news channel, and a server had gone to turn it off when a voice from the sitting room said, clearly enough to be heard through the open doorway, "And now, Business Week's Person of the Year, Taraji Ose, founder and CEO of OC Tech." The server stopped. The trifle was not admired anymore. Evelyn Hargrove, who had been mid-sentence, about something involving a renovation in the second guest bathroom, stopped speaking. Hortense, sitting beside her, turned toward the doorway with the expression of someone who has heard their own name said unexpectedly in a public place. Bertrand looked up from his coffee. Reed set down his cup. Clifton went very still. On the television screen, in the sitting room that was visible through the doorway from where 47 people sat, Taraji's face appeared. It was a photograph from the Financial Post shoot. She was wearing a deep green blazer and looking directly at the camera. And she looked, objectively, like someone who had recently been named Businessweek's Person of the Year, which she had been, though she had not mentioned it at dinner, because there had not been, in 9 years, a space at the Hargrove table where that kind of information was welcome. The segment was 90 seconds long. It covered the growth of OCTech, the TSX ceremony, the recent acquisition of a UK-based data firm that had made national news in 3 countries. The anchor described her as one of Canada's most consequential entrepreneurs of the past decade. There was a clip of Taraji speaking at the Vancouver conference, 17,000 people visible in the background, and she was composed and precise, and the room behind her was very, very large. No one at the dinner table spoke for the full 90 seconds. When the segment ended, the server reached over and turned off the television. The silence continued. It was Hortense who broke it, finally, in the way that people break silences when they are embarrassed and hope that motion will disguise the embarrassment. She said, "Well," and then could not find anything to follow it with, so she said, "Well again," and then she picked up her spoon and addressed the trifle. Evelyn Hargrove looked at Taraji. It was the first time, in 9 years, that Taraji could recall the woman looking at her directly and not slightly past her, as though Taraji were a painting in a room with better paintings and deserved only peripheral attention. Gerald said, very quietly, "Business Week." "Person of the Year," Clifton said. His voice came out strange, too flat, like something from which the air had been removed. Taraji picked up her coffee. It was slightly too hot, but she drank it anyway. The drive back to Toronto that night was 3.5 hours. They had taken Clifton's car, a Volvo SUV he had bought 2 years ago and was proud of, and for the first hour neither of them said anything. The highway was clear, and there was a light snow on the fields on either side of the 400. And Taraji watched it and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill she had developed over the years as a way of being in silence without filling it. Clifton spoke somewhere around Barrie. He said, "You didn't tell me." "About the award?" she said. "About any of it. The acquisition. The keynote thing. Any of it." "You know about most of it," she said. "We talked about the acquisition when it closed. Not like that. Not the way they said it on television." A pause. 17,000 people. "Give or take," she said. The snow thickened briefly and then thinned again. A transport truck passed them on the left. "My mother looked like she'd been." He stopped. "I know what she looked like," Taraji said. "I should have." Another stop. "You should have," she agreed. She said it quietly, without accusation, which was worse, she suspected, than if she had said it loudly. He didn't say anything for a while after that. Around Vaughn, he said, "I think they had no idea. Truly, I don't think they knew the scale of it." "I know they didn't," she said. "I could have told them. I should have." "Clifton." She said his name gently. "The way you say someone's name when you want them to hear you." "When was the last time anyone at that table asked me a direct question about my work? Not Gerald's annual and how are things at the company. A real question. A question that wanted a real answer." He was quiet. "When was the last time you answered that question for them without waiting for me to? When was the last time you corrected anyone who got it wrong?" The silence this time was different. It had the quality of something being understood rather than something being avoided. "I didn't want to seem like I was showing off," he said finally. "Whose accomplishment were you worried about showing off?" she said. That landed the way she had known it would. She had known it for about 3 years, the precise way that particular observation would land. And she had never said it until now, because she had been protecting something. His comfort, her place in the family, the idea of the family itself as a thing worth protecting. She looked at the highway, and felt the weight of 3 years of unsaid things sitting in the car with them like a third passenger. They separated in February. It was not a dramatic separation. There was no single incident that preceded it. The winter dinner had been a catalyst, the way a small vibration is the catalyst for an avalanche that was already, structurally, inevitable. She had been holding the mountain together for 9 years. She had grown tired. Clifton did not fight it. He was sad in the genuine way that people are sad when they understand. Finally, what they have lost, and that the losing was largely their own doing. He said things in the conversations that followed that were true and came too late, and were received by Taraji with the same grace she had brought to the Hargrove dinners. Acknowledgement without anger, because she had long since moved through the anger to something quieter on the other side. She kept the condo in Toronto. He moved into a rental in the annex. They divided their shared things without litigation, because Taraji had seen what litigation did to people, and she did not want that for either of them. Evelyn Hargrove called in March. It was the first time the woman had called Taraji directly in 9 years of marriage, and Taraji had looked at the name on her phone screen for a long moment before answering. Evelyn said she was sorry. She said it in the way of someone who has rehearsed the words, but not the feeling underneath them. So the words arrived slightly ahead of the feeling, like a translation. She said she hadn't realized. She said, and this was the part that Taraji would think about later, alone, on the balcony of her condo, looking at the city, she said, I didn't see you clearly. Taraji had said, I know. She had not said, I know, and I spent 9 years asking you to, and you chose not to, and that choosing had consequences, and the consequences are where we are now. She had said, I know, and let it hold everything else. The way silence sometimes holds more than words can carry. The following November, OZ Tech was acquired. Not purchased, exactly, but merged, in a deal structure that left Taraji as executive chair of a combined entity that had operations in 7 countries, an evaluation that the Globe and Mail called a defining moment in Canadian tech. She rang a bell again, this time in London. The photograph from it ran on the front page of 3 business sections. She had a new life by then. Smaller in some ways, quieter in the domestic ways that she had not known she wanted until she had them. She ran in the mornings along the lakeshore and stopped at a coffee place on Queen's Quay where the barista knew her order and did not care who she was in the way that the cameras cared. She called her mother in Brampton every Sunday. She had dinner with friends who asked her real questions and expected real answers. She did not go to the Hargrove winter dinner that year. She had not been invited, which was correct and appropriate, and she would not have gone regardless. She thought about it sometimes. The 47 people at the table, the white poinsettias, the broken glass on the floor that no one moved to pick up. She thought about standing outside the frame of a family photograph that had not included her. She thought about being asked if she did the alterations and answering pleasantly. She thought about the television in the sitting room and the 90 seconds that had said, in a voice she had not needed to raise, everything she had ever wanted to say in that house. She did not miss it. She was surprised, for a while, by how little she missed it. The table, the property, the idea she had carried of what it meant to belong to something larger than yourself. She had spent 9 years reaching for that belonging and not quite closing her fingers around it. And in the losing of it, she had discovered that what she had built in the meantime, the company, the work, the life she had made entirely from her own effort and refusal to stop, was larger than any table she had ever been excluded from. The lake was still there, in Muskoka. She supposed it always would be. She did not need to stand at that window to know it was beautiful.